Hello everyone and welcome to another Destiny Movie Night Hangout. My name is Joanna and during this hangout we're going to discuss the movie There Will Be Blood, and as always we welcome your questions during this live session. With me I have two panelists. We have Kelly from the United States in Washington State. Hello Kelly.
Hi.
And we have Joe with me in London.
Hello.
So before we go to our discussion, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction or a brief summary about this movie for those who haven't watched it or for those that have watched it. And this is the story of Daniel Plainview, an oilman in the United States that is an entrepreneur, and he starts to develop, like he searches for oil. And then he develops his business with the purpose of becoming the most wealthy man in Southern California. And then in this movie, there are various dynamics and dimensions that we can approach during this hangout. But two of them are the relationships that this guy Daniel develops with people, or that he doesn't develop, and that he ends up being alone by himself with all his wealth. And also the relationship with the church, and eventually what's going to happen. There's these two sides of the same coin, and a fight for power between he and himself as the oil man that holds the resources and the money, and then we have Eli Sunday. Who is the priest of the Church of the Third Revelation, that also tries to leave his power from the will of God, and they both almost like competing with each other, and we see the darkness, and the movie gets really intense, and then the title There Will Be Blood, because there is lots of blood, there's death, there's madness, and all the things that we actually see as part of our system, the world of profit, of greed, of self-interest. And in this hangout, we're going to cover these topics, but as always, we're going to give our own perspectives, as our own experience here on Earth as human beings that live in the system, and that we are walking the Desteni I process, and all this feedback that we are providing is also from our own process of getting to know who we are. Right, so without further ado, I'm going to begin this discussion. And just to remind you that you can send us your questions. As I said, we're live, so you can use the Q&A app on this Google Plus event, and we will read them as we go along. So guys, let me start with you, Kelly. What was the main point in this movie that resonated with your own process and life, and why?
Well, let's see. There's so many dimensions to this movie. It was, as you said, it was a very intense movie and very dramatic. And, you know, a lot of people say it's one of the best movies in the 2000s. Although I hadn't seen it myself until only recently. But for me, what's really struck me the most is how much it really exposes the reality of how the United States, you know, was founded, how industry was founded in this country, in terms of the starting point of it being really about profit and always the bottom line, and not so much about you know, creating the best society and providing resources to everyone according to how it would be best. It was really about, you know, what are the resources that are here? How can I take them? How can I use them? Make money out of them? How can I be the only one making money out of them? How can I squash my competition? You know, and always thinking of how can I do things differently in a way that's going to save me money and cost me less and beat out my competition and my opponents. And so it's never really been done from a starting point of what's the best we could do, you know, like taking into consideration, okay, we've got this earth here, we've got these resources, we have needs, how do we use all this in a way that's really best, you know, sustainable. And so it kind of really gives a good view of that on the point as a whole. But then when we take it to like an individual level and our individual process, it's like we can look at how do we ourselves in our individual lives still kind of have that focus of me first, me only, my own interests, looking out for myself, what's best for me, and still not taking it to that big picture level of what's actually best, all things considered, you know? So that's what really struck me the most about this movie, personally.
Thank you, Kelly. And it's great your feedback because, I mean, as you said, you're from the United States, so I don't know exactly what you guys learn in the history books, but you probably kind of see oilmen or any other kind of people that have started the businesses over there are like heroes of society because they were the founders of the system itself. But then if you look closer, we see that there are lots of consequences that could have been prevented and done differently.
Yeah, that's very true. And a lot of stuff that was done very deliberately that caused a lot of harm. I mean, just for example, one thing that struck me with this movie was, you know, the title of it is There Will Be Blood. And in the beginning, as he's starting out in his oil industry, you know, here and there, like deaths occur and injuries occur and things like that. And it's like understood that that's just a part of it. That's going to be an accepted part of developing that industry. And I mean, this has happened in all sorts of industries, you know, building dams and what have you, you know, so many people have died in the process, especially the oil industry. You know, when you look at what it's become today, and it's an extremely dangerous job, you know, and I mean, I was considering myself actually to get into the oil industry at one point and did some research on it. And man, there's a lot of horrific videos out there just showing the kinds of atrocities that can happen to you working in that industry. So that's a very apt title, There Will Be Blood, because it kind of shows that it's accepted, like that's just going to happen. These kind of atrocities are going to be part of it, instead of looking at, well, hey, why don't we, you know, like I was saying before, if we approach things from what's best and, you know, from that kind of a starting point, it's not, you know, we wouldn't be taking life so for granted. Like, we just kind of have to do what we can, scrap it together. People are going to get hurt. Oh, well, you know, like, it's like we haven't been valuing life in terms of like, hey, let's approach this practically, look at how we can do this, try not to have anybody die, you know. But yeah, like you're saying, in terms of what we learn in school, I mean, when I was in school, which was a little while ago, but I don't know that it's very much different what we learn today in history. But yeah, the founding fathers of society, if you will, not the founding fathers of the country per se, but the ones who founded like industry in this country, are usually presented in a very positive light. Like, it's really amazing what they did and what they established. And like, if you read the books like by Ayn Rand, for example, that kind of touches on that, those founders of like our capitalist system. But when you get down into the reality of it, you know, there's been a lot of blood and a lot of deceptive tactics and deliberate machinations, all for that purpose of gaining control of an industry, gaining money, profit, power. Yeah, so this really shows that it wasn't all as, you know, pretty as it was portrayed to be. Yeah, but we definitely don't learn that in actual history.
I see this movie quite as a perfect reflection of our system, the system that we have nowadays, on quite a lot of dimensions, not everything, but a lot of them. Mainly the industries, like it has been mentioned, but also the perspective of the religion and how religion has been used to control people. And the title itself, There Will Be Blood, there is the literal side of it, as in blood of people coming out of the bodies, but also the blood which runs the system nowadays, which you can see as oil. So oil is what runs the system, is the blood of the system, what makes everything function. And then you also have the religious side, which is the blood of Jesus, where you have to accept Jesus as your savior, and it's his blood that will save you. That's the belief. So there's blood in many dimensions in this movie, and I find that, like I said, it's a perfect reflection of the system that we have nowadays, and obviously how deceitful, how bloodthirst, how much greed we have, and all the bad things we have in this system is reflected.
At the same time, we have Daniel Time here, so he's the main guy of the character, and then he has his son HW. But if we look at his character, we have the dark side, like the threatening presence, and at the same time, there are very cool aspects that we can learn from his attitude. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about it, and how could we also learn and then apply in the different directions? So instead of using it for self-interest, what would happen if we were all so confident about our own selves and visionaries? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, he did have some aspects that were very effective. I mean, he did get to a point of, power and money, and he did that through his determination, through being very, able to look at what's going on and see how I can make this or that choice, that's going to make me be successful. And, he had a determination and a focus, and, just unfortunately, it was used for that point of self-interest at the expense of everyone else, and even himself in the end, because he ended up alone and not having any good relationships in his life. And I mean, the fact is, you live here with other people, you have to get along with them if you want to be able to enjoy yourself here, or you're going to end up alone in your mansion, miserable.
Sorry.
But yeah, so if we took those qualities and used them instead, realizing that, we've got to consider what works for everyone here, so that we can create something that's going to be lasting and is going to work in terms of the fact that we live here with all kinds of other people. We're not alone, and we need to make things in such a way that it's actually to our benefit. And so, yeah.
And what I was thinking is that in the movie, when he kind of started digging the oil, and then he was presenting to the community who he was introducing himself before anyone would talk, and kind of damage his plan. He went and introduced to the people as someone that really cared about them, and he was saying, now this is actually good for you, and we're going to build roads, and we're going to build schools and a new church. So he's like selling them. So he was using the people in order to have the acceptance for him to do it. And I think that was the main, one of the main points in the movie where he actually demonstrated some kind of humanity and care. But then like an hour later, when he was discussing his own, when he was showing his personality to his half brother, then he discussed and he said, like, what I want is to get rich and don't have to be with these people. And so it's like,
get away from
he just wanted to get away and just like take as much as he could and then just leave and don't really care about what he was doing. So that is all. That's the polarity that that is manifesting.
Yeah, that's the point that you see nowadays in this system as well, where we always find the excuses that apparently we're doing this for the good, but the real reason behind it, that's not the real reason. It's not for the benefit of everyone.
And why not?
Well, why not? Because we're brainwashed. Because we've been programmed by this environment where we were born.
With survival system, to think that that's the only way we can exist.
And that's then the way we exist, because that's the only thing we believe. It's the only way we believe it can exist. And all the corporations, all big industries, they do this stuff. They say we're gonna go to this country. It's gonna bring jobs. It's gonna bring this, blah blah blah. And the same with the FIFA, and the same with
airports,
Olympics.
Yeah.
You know, name it. They all say it's gonna be good for the community. It's gonna bring money. But in the end, the reason is to actually make money. There's no other reason. It's not to actually provide a good quality of life for the population. It's not true.
That's almost like a collateral benefit, but not the main objective.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Kelly, what were you saying? I interrupted you earlier on. Sorry, I mean, it was just about this point of this point of his character. I think you were talking something about him.
Oh yeah, about using those qualities for, you know, the benefit of everyone. Like Joao was saying, you know, we don't like learn that idea or that solution of what if we considered everybody. We learn to focus on our own interests, and we have to look out for ourselves, maybe a couple family members, you know, and that's it. You just plow along, you look out for you. And that's the kind of the same principle that was shown throughout this movie, is that that's what we've always believed. That's what we've always been running on, that program of I can only look out for me. I've got to do what I need to do, regardless of what that might affect anybody else. And we've never really realized that point of, well, wait a minute, what if we actually created a world in a way that, you know, is considering everyone, is caring for everyone, and we don't have to have that kind of competition. Like with the FIFA and all this, and the businesses that are saying like, hey, you know, it's going to be a benefit to you because we're going to come and make jobs and this and that. But none of it actually addresses the underlying problem of why are people struggling in the first place, that sounds like a good deal. You know, we've never approached that from like, how do we make an actual solution?
And it's interesting that then the church comes in and it's like, no, actually, we are the ones going to save you. So it's like, yes, you're not, the problem is not that you're poor, it's the problem that you don't believe, or the problem is that you're sick, but we don't look at the actual roots of the problem in order to prevent it from happening. Like these 2 points, like the system as it exists now of profit and self-interest works really well with the other side, which is the majority of the people that were actually part of the church were like poor people that had to believe in something in order to keep going. So it's like it kind of bedfellows.
Yeah.
You can see correlation between the economic system and the religious system, where in the economic system, specifically what we have nowadays and what we see in the movie is like draining the life out of people, their energy to produce profit money for just a select few. And the same way that you have religion sucking out the energy as the belief that people have in something out there that's going to save them and so on, to give power to a select few, in this case would be the priest. So it really is a reflection of each other, and that's also what you see between Daniel and Eli, where they kind of recognize each other. They know they're both bullshitting each other, or trying to. So because they are exactly the same.
Yeah. I mean, it's like 2 sides of the same coin, and in the end, you know, they both come down to money. You know, for Eli, being the pastor of the church, it was his job, and you know, he was trying to negotiate with Daniel Plainview to get money for his church, because it's all about the money. And then in the very end, he comes crawling back, you know, to try and make a deal for that land that one guy had held out, Mr. Bandy or something like that, didn't want to sell it, and he tried to come back to make a deal on that, but you know, Daniel Plainview had already sucked it dry from surrounding land. But you know, and Eli, it was all about the money in the end. You know, he wasn't making it. And so it's kind of like two sides of the same coin where both of them are, you know, whether it's business or church, both are trying to sell you something in the end. And, you know, interestingly with church, there's another dimension of where it's kind of like you just have to accept how things are in this life, but here you can come get some salvation for the afterlife. You know, like give up on this life now because this is just the way it is. There's no solution for here, and come and get your salvation so that at least in the next life, you know, it'll be all right.
Yeah. Another thing I'd like to mention is I just forgot.
Yeah.
I just had
it happens.
It's
Just
gone.
take it fresh and
You speak.
I was saying that the dynamic between the two of them, they're always trying to kind of challenge each other. Kelly and I, when we were talking about this movie earlier, we discussed about this point of they were trying to, like, Eli was trying to make Daniel admit that he was a sinner and that he had abandoned his child and he had done all those things and he didn't believe in God. And then on the other hand, at the end, Daniel forces Eli to admit that he's a false prophet. And then they both do that in order to get what they wanted. So in the end, the principles, they are completely useless because there are no principles. They just have an objective. And it was, and then just after Daniel got he was baptized, and then he just said, yes, I got the wheel, or that's all he wanted. Yes, I got the pipeline, because that's all he wanted in order to get through Mr. Brandy's land. So it's like you see, and these are so subtle things that it still exists within us. If we look at ourselves, sometimes in the questions we ask, we're not direct. We go around in circles in order to get something, and that's something to be aware of. This movie represents that what already exists within us if we are not aware of it.
Yeah, that was exactly the point I wanted to say, actually.
Okay.
So you read my mind.
All right.
You have your core beliefs, and also how Daniel, like, he knew what he wanted, and if it meant that would be slapped in front of everybody, and pour some water over him, whatever, he didn't care about it. Now I have my pipeline, so he did whatever he had to, and in the end as well, Eli, to get what he wanted, what he needed, actually, not God or salvation, was money. He also said, I'm a false prophet, God is a superstition. So, when times are tough, the real colors of who you are shown. And obviously, within this, you can see that there's no real principles. That these individuals have no real principles beside their own self-interest and survival. And within this, you cannot actually, it's impossible for you to create something that is beneficial for everybody, where you're considering everybody, because you're just considering yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that's what we have in industry today. We have, for example, your major supermarkets, they put out a lot of PR and marketing and commercials to make it seem like, oh, we're this great supermarket that's all about providing you the best quality food, but really it's not, because, and I myself, having had a job where I worked in multiple supermarkets, I got to see how the same products in different stores would be different prices, because it's based on what that area can afford to pay. So it's not about giving you like a fair price or an equal price or anything like that. It's about making money off of you, but it gets painted as like this nice picture when it's really always about the money. And so businesses will do and say whatever it takes. Like you're saying, there's no principles. And like we have with big industry, like the pharmaceutical industry, for example, and all the big industries, the tactic that they have of where they will actually fund testing to be done that produces the results that they would like to show, that says that their product is great. And it's all about, supporting their product, supporting their business, supporting their industry. But I think the really important point, like you're saying, is to realize that we also do this on the individual level. And that's the important point that we're walking within our process, because it's to realize that the problems aren't like only out there on the big scale, but that we're living them within ourselves, within who we are. And it seems small. It seems like who I am is small, and the decisions I make are small, and it doesn't really matter. But that is how it happens on the big scale. It starts with us and the decisions we make in terms of, I'm gonna make a decision where I'm gonna act in my own interest and at the expense of someone else for whatever justification. And like you were saying, like where we will say things that, aren't really true, but it's just to serve that personal interest to get what we want in the end. So it's exactly the same point.
And I was a little bit shocked, which I shouldn't, because this movie was all about like these surprises. Like you couldn't believe that someone was saying that, and then they would completely contradict themselves. But I was shocked when he was actually saying to his son, HW, that he was not his son, and that he always used him just to have a child with him to be easier to get the land. So he was a prop.
It was marketing.
Yeah, and that's exactly like, that's the beginning of the image. It's like you have a brand, and he was saying, this is my partner, and everyone would see a child, and you would think, oh, this guy actually cares about him. He's doing this for his family. But he was like, I don't really care. He just wanted to use him as a prop for his own interests. And in the end, he told his son that he was adopted, and all of that is just, that is like the beginning of what nowadays we see as all these brands. That there are images where they use images of children eating this type of food, or foods that are actually junk food, and they think that that's going to give them the feedback, exactly, the feedback.
To the seed.
Yeah,
and that's
a great point. Yeah.
And then, as you said, Kelly, it's about bringing that point to ourselves, because we might not use perhaps our child to do that, but we do use certain things in our reality in order to show off or to pretend to be something, because we think that because we need something from another, which is not self-honest most often, because you need to be perceived as better or superior or wealthier. And then we kind of forget that in the end we are equals, and that all this separation is just building blocks that eventually will all fall down and will bring consequences to everybody. And that is the movie. They show consequences at these different levels, but it brings, like his son, he got deaf in the part of the business, so it's like the whole story kind of there's people that are able to, and I'm not separating myself from them when I say this, but we believe that wherever they touch, they turn gold. But then there's also the point of wherever you go, if who you are is completely separated from another, then you're going to continuously create separation. It all comes down from who we are, where do we stand as, and then we create that. So the world system, and that's kind of what I saw is to be the most important thing in the movie, is that, or for me, is that it reflects all the dynamics that we participate within us. It's like who we are, it's what we create. Who we are as the world system, it's what the world system is from the outside. It's impressive.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah, because we always have a choice. And in the movie, what was cool was where there were moments where, when he was admitting in the church that, he'd abandoned his son, at a certain point it became very real because it was true, and he knew it. He had abandoned him. And there was a part of him that saw that was not cool, And so we have those moments in our life where it's like we do know, like we can sense something is like, is this really, the decision we want to make here? Is this going to end up creating consequence, or is it going to be beneficial? It's like there's a part of us that can see that point, and that's where we have that power to make that decision to create consequence or create solution, because then he had his son come back after that. Like, it's like, it was kind of an epiphany for him to realize, like, whoa, what did I actually want to do in that, and he brought the son back. And so, of course, it was kind of this seesaw where, then when the son wanted to go into competition, it was like, oh, well, you can't compete with me. And he went into that whole, you're an orphan and I don't care and go away. And so it just shows that, like, it's always up to us. We always have that decision that we can ruin the relationships in our lives, or we could choose a different way and not end up, because I don't think anybody wants to end up how he did in the end, totally drunk, alone,
That's another point that I can see in regards to the system having no principles, but the ego principle, which is all for me and fuck the rest, and how that translates into the ending of his life, how he ended up with just lots of money and a big house and whatever, but nothing substantial, no joy, no happiness, no fun, his kid is even, or his adopted son, leaving him as well, because who wants to be with someone like that anyway? And which translates into the way that we as a system are going, because we in the system, we have no principles. It really is just, each one fending for themselves, and you just look around the sort of destruction that we're creating in nature, in the animals, in the planet, and then within ourselves, not only as a global population, but as well as individually, how there's lots of cases of depression, of rape, you name it, the whole thing. So again, another reflection of how not having principles and just thinking for your own good will translate into all this destruction in the end. And this is the consequences that we're seeing in the world. And unless we stop and change and forgive and let go and really make our own principle of making the best for everyone, for life, and live that just with the same ruthlessness, with the same direction, with the same determination that he had, and that translated into him being successful in being an oilman. Unless we do that, then we're doomed. There will be blood.
And there is already.
And there is lots of it.
So we have about 7 minutes left, and I just want to remind everyone who's watching us that you can send your questions or comments during this live session. So we're gonna, wait for your questions to come through. And then one thing that I was looking at is that we tend in our society, and we talked a little bit about that in the beginning, about admire people that are successful in power, and we only know one side of the story, or we got to know it. We don't know what actually made them take certain decisions. And that's something in the movie, that this main character was quite charismatic in this movie. And there was this a commentator that said that watching this movie is like seeing a natural disaster, and that you cannot turn away from. It's like a catastrophe that is just happening, and you see that everything is falling apart. And
it's a human disaster.
Yeah, it's a human disaster. So I wanted to ask you guys, and Joe, you already touched a little bit upon that, but how can we invert this? So because now this movie happened in the beginning of the 20th century, and now we are in 2015, where we are seeing all these changes in the world, in the atmosphere, everything that has been a result of our action over the last 100 years. So how can we invert this, starting by our own selves as the principles? Kelly, do you want to share?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because as more people are getting a bit more aware of, how things are being done industrially and with big companies, and seeing that it's not really always in the best interest of everyone. We're seeing more protests and things like that. So there's kind of this relationship of separation of blame towards the companies, where it's kind of seeing it as this separate thing and it's their fault and we need to protest so that they will change, but not realizing that it was all not so separate. We aren't separate from how things developed, but in the end, it doesn't even matter how things got to how they are now. It was a different time and a different place back then. Individuals had different opportunities to establish those kind of industries that it doesn't really exist that way today. So we just kind of have to like forgive the past and let it go, because it's a different time now. We have different abilities that we can utilize to, now that we're starting to see, oh, things aren't really going so well. You know, we're polluting the environment, we're doing things unsustainably, but rather to take this as a point of self-responsibility, instead of trying to put the responsibility on the businesses and the industries that already developed from the starting point of profits. I mean, we can't go and blame them and say, you have to change, because we're living the very same things ourselves, and we have to change that within ourselves to then be able to look at how can we do this differently, because this is the way the system is right now, and we have to take that into consideration, and how can we change things in a holistic way so that we're not doing the same thing that Daniel Plainview did in terms of creating this conflict and competition with everyone all the time. You know, because what did we see the result of that is, you know, like with him and Eli, it didn't go very well in the end. They were not friends in the end, you know, because they consistently chose to always be trying to get the better of the other person, you know. And so when we kind of take that competitive approach or that conflictual approach, it's always going to result in bad relationships. You know, it's not going to result, it's always going to be this, like, you know, the expression where you've got a tiger by the tail kind of thing. It's like you can't let go or he's going to bite you. Yeah, and it's like you always have to try and maintain that upper edge, you know, over your opponent. And what we've seen is this doesn't lead to any kind of effective change, effective relationships. It's always, you know, creates the never-ending cycle of competition and spitefulness and conflict. So it's the same when we try and approach changing how things are from that point of blame and conflict. This is going to create more. You know, it's not going. We need to now develop proper relationships in order to force change.
Another point I see, once we realize, one of the things we obviously must do is look at the past and see how we have created the things, so that we're able to deconstruct it within ourselves first. And so that's the point of education. And then to add to that, if you see how the system has developed to what it is today, you see that it's not just people acting in certain ways. There's a system that is directing things to be as they are. And so the cycle repeats. So what we have to do once we understand that we have to change our ways is we have to create systems that will actually support the correction of all the destruction and the blood that we have created in this world. That means, like Kelly said, is cooperation. We have to work together, just like you see them in the movies working together separately, but working together within the system to create their own little heavens for themselves and disregard the rest of the population. So we must work together to actually create a heaven for everybody. Heaven meaning just the world that is, you know, benefits everybody, where everybody can live comfortably. So that's it. Educate, realize how we got here, re-educate ourselves, and then work together, cooperate to create something that is good for everybody. And then there's no more blood.
Yeah. And that's exactly the purpose of these hangouts. So if you guys can subscribe to our channel, because every week we do hangouts about various different topics. So we have the Desteni Movie Night Hangout, which we pick a movie, and then we discuss these topics to ourselves and the world. And then you also have the Senior Hangout, you have the DesteniiProcess Hangout. So that's what we're doing. We're educating ourselves, understanding the world from within, in order to then be able to change and to create these systems to replace the ones that are currently definitely not working for the benefit of everyone. Kelly, before we stop this live hangout, any last thoughts that you would like to share?
Yeah, actually, in relation to that point of, trying to create our own private heavens, it's the same thing as what Daniel Plainview did, right? And what the entrepreneurs of the society have typically done is the focus has been, let me get enough money and control so that I can create my own private heaven. And then we're also doing it on the individual level, where it's like, let me manipulate and do things, try and work things out so I can create my own private heaven. But the point that we've missed is that if we create life on all of Earth to be heaven, you don't have to then try and create it in a little bubble. So if we focus on that big picture and making life here in totality heavenly, we don't have to then be so focused in that personal self-interest point of, I've got to do it just for me.
Exactly.
And one last thing is that at some point when Daniel became known and recognized, then there was this guy that appeared in his life saying that he was his half brother, and then he Daniel trusted him for some time. Then he realized that he was actually a scam, and that guy was actually not his brother. So even when you are very powerful, you're gonna always have that distrust because you think people are gonna take things away from you and they're gonna want your things because you're taking them something. And so if we can actually build a system that supports everyone and everyone supports themselves and each other, then we don't have anything to lose, and we can actually enjoy this earth much better.
That's it.
Cool. Okay, so we're now reaching the end of the hangout. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Kelly, for your participation. Always good to have you on the hangout. Thank you, Joe. And next week we'll be back with another movie. All right, see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.